This is Store and Forward, a podcast about the past and future of amateur radio. This is episode number 3, and I am KB6NU, curator of the Digital Library of Amateur Radio and Communications. And I'm here with my good ham radio buddy.
Steve Stroh, NAGNJ, and I am the editor of the Zero Retries newsletter, which is at www.zero, spell it out, Zero, retries, retries.org.
We are recording this on July 28th, 2024, and we are broadcasting from our brand new URL. Do you broadcast from a URL? We are. Our new address for this podcast is storeandforwardradio.org, and you can subscribe to that in your favorite podcast listener and get automatically updated every time we create an episode, which, we're shooting for a couple times a month, depending on schedules and things. And that's the audio version. And the video version is always going to be uploaded to the Digital Library of Amateur Radio and Communications. Front matter complete. How you doing, Steve?
Good. I was walking out, so I record in my office, which is a corner of my big shop that I call NAGNJ Labs. And it just struck me, the weather is so beautiful today and has been for pretty much the whole month of July. It's like it gives you amnesia about what it's like to go through the winter in the Pacific Northwest.
Yes.
So it just like inoculates you. You just forget.
My mom was just visiting. She visited for about a week. She lives in Scottsdale, Arizona. She loves the heat. She loves the desert. She loves the hot. And she visited for a week and the weather was nice. And she came to get out of the heat where, it's 110, 115 there. And she came here and it was in the 80s and it was very nice. Nice change for her. And she's just like, I could live here. I was like, no, you couldn't, Mom.
No.
This is the best weather we have. And yeah, but the rest, 9 months of the year, it's raining and you would be miserable. So she's
My
trying to
my
convince herself, but
when my dad would visit, he says, "How can you live here?" And I said, "It doesn't bother me." And he says, "Just wait, it will." And sure enough, it's like I ran out of melatonin or something.
yeah, the
So
vitamin
yeah,
D
yeah, absolutely.
stores run out.
Yep.
Yeah. So
Yep.
let's see. I just got back a few days ago from my big trip to Denver, Colorado, to look at the Bob Cooper archives. And I talked about this last episode, but now that trip is done. I get to this warehouse in Denver, and uh, I see that there are 3 pallets of stuff. And, like shipping pallets, I don't know what are they, I don't know how big a shipping pallet is, but 9 by 9 and stacked high with boxes. I'm like, okay, well, this isn't as bad as they said it was. I could deal with 3 pallets of stuff. And I look across the room. After about 10 minutes, I look across the room and see 4 more pallets of stuff. I'm like,
Oh,
oh,
wow.
there was 7. I'm like, oh, this is a lot more. My plan, as I think we talked about last time you and I talked, was to basically do a first run sort of the material, but most of it would have to go to California to be shipped via LTL carrier to get to Internet Archive's warehouse in California for me to deal with at a future date. And that's not actually what happened. I spent 3 full long days in the warehouse and got everything sorted and everything, almost everything, where it needed to go. Reboxed everything, made a bunch of trips to FedEx and sent things to via FedEx ground. And my stats are I shipped off of Bob Cooper's material 16 boxes of videotapes to the digitizer. I had 2 boxes of weird format tapes to deal with later. 21 boxes of magazines and newsletters and books went to the scanners. 5 boxes went straight to storage. And there were 5 entire boxes of unsorted negatives and photos and picture CDs and things that's a future project. And 2 boxes I shipped to myself here to my office to deal with, to take a closer look at. Um, and so all in all, it was a huge success. I was expecting, I'm a guy who sits and types. I code, I write, I move things around Internet Archive. I'm an office guy. I was expecting my legs and back to hurt. After lifting boxes for days. That was not a surprise when that started to happen. What was a surprise was when my fingers started to bleed from from touching so many things, sorting through papers, um,
Mm.
building boxes, doing the tape and making boxes happen, and just like sorting through hundreds and hundreds of magazines and newsletters and CD-ROMs and stuff. My fingers are not used to that kind of activity. So just like, oh, I'm a weak little guy. So yeah, my fingers were bleeding and they're only just getting better.
So remind the new listeners what the relevance of this project.
So um as curator of the digital library of amateur radio and communications, people come to me with material, uh, and this was Bob Cooper's everything. Bob Cooper was a person who was fundamental in the development of TVRO, a TV receive only, which was basically having a big satellite dish to get TV for free right after you set up a $5,000 satellite dish in your backyard. Um, uh, just getting television signals from satellite, and then he was very big in the early days of cable television, and so he was huge in the development in consumer television communication.
Hmm.
Um, and he saved everything. And after he died, it ended up after a long series of events. He died in he retired and finished his life in New Zealand, but all of his stuff was in New Zealand, and then it got shipped to Denver and sat there for a while. And so I was sorting through the stuff, and this man, all I know about him really is what I learned from him looking through his stuff. But so I know about Bob Cooper is that this man saved everything. He took detailed, copious notes about every project, which was from various magazines and newsletters and setting up cable systems for hotels and doing conferences, um, and he saved all of his. He took great notes and he saved all of his notes, and then he didn't throw anything away. And so I had to sort through it, decide like what belongs in a library. What do people going to care about? Um, he That's how you end up with 7 pallets of material. You want to see a couple of things I found?
Sure.
All right. So
Well, I did
yeah,
has some of the material already been digitized? Because I watched the RSS feed of DLARC, and Coop's Satellite Digest started showing up in there. So was
yes.
that the recent digitization?
That was um, the Coop Satellite Digest. Actually, Bob Cooper or his people had digitized that himself. They
Okay.
digitized some of his material, and so I found that on CD-ROM.
Oh, okay.
And so I got that off of CD-ROM, and so those were easy to upload. He wrote many other publications that are still yet to be digitized.
I was
So
going to say he was a prodigious author because I remember reading him about him in the context of amateur radio. So,
mhm. Yeah,
so you
he
were going to
wrote
show some
he wrote. Yeah,
goodies?
it's just some of the random things I found. So over here off screen, there are CD-ROMs and DVDs, dozens, probably low hundreds of CDs for me to go through. And I don't know if the information, I don't know if it's worthwhile, but I need to look at it and see what's on there. The first thing I found among that, I found a bunch of DVD RAM discs.
Oh, interesting.
Uh-huh. It was about 10 of them. And it turns out they have video. I had to find out like, okay, how do you read a DVD RAM disc? And they're not really discs, they're cartridges. They're there's an optical disc that looks like a DVD or a CD-ROM, but it's in a cartridge with a little shutter.
Wow.
Uh, anyway, so I had to research that and found out you can open them and just take out the disc, and then depending on DVD, your DVD player on your PC, you may be able to just read them. And one of my DVD players was actually able to read them, so I got them offline and got the information off. And actually, I have some video I want to show you from one of them. That's super. It just shows you like the kind of stuff we have. So and just so many newsletters and things. I have here uh, wide green bar computer paper. This is just a little bit of it. This is maybe 20 sheets, but there's another a lot more over there, which is the source code. Looks like 6502 source code for the Video Cipher 2 descrambling box,
Yeah.
the cable
I
descrambler.
I remember
Um,
they tried to do cheap, simple copy protection by like inverting one bit,
mhm.
something about that. And that was the first generation of copy protection that, so the story
Just an
goes,
XOR or something like that.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So the story goes that Coop figured out that the early cable TV content providers, like the then brand new HBO, were broadcasting NTSC standard video via satellite transponder, and it was completely unencrypted. It was just, so if you could receive it, you could watch it. And the HBO and company was just totally aghast that somebody would have the chutzpah to do this and then publish the details. And the problem is that their entire infrastructure was not set up for any kind of encryption. So this went on for years before they could upgrade all of their cable system folks. And keep in mind that they were broadcasting, to an entire continent of cable TV systems. So each city has their own cable TV system, which had a satellite dish pointed, up and, receiving all this stuff. So they had to upgrade every one of those things before they could turn on the encryption. And then when they did, it was simple, stupid like that. And Bob said, "Oh, no problem. Here's how you do that."
Right. So, right. So these people who had been getting their HBO for free over the air, through satellite, well, HBO eventually, got wise to that and got their technology up to par. And they were just like, well, look, you can buy a box. You can buy this box for a couple $100, and then you can pay us $12.95 a month. And you too, satellite people, can have HBO, but it'll be legitimate. It'll be, you won't be stealing it. You won't be dirty pirates anymore. And people, as because people being people, they didn't like this idea. They had been getting something for free, and they had invested in the hardware of their satellite dish, and now they're telling they need to be paying $12.95 a month, which is like something like $35 in today's dollars, if you want to, with inflation and everything. Um, and they weren't having it. And then this one guy uh, decided to, named Captain Midnight, decided to like do a protest, and he took over for 4 minutes HBO satellite feed.
Oh yeah, I
He
remember
was a
this.
guy who worked at a cable TV station, and he just pointed his, satellite antenna at the satellite, and he just took it over. And this wasn't illegal yet. I wouldn't have thought to do this. I have a video I want to show you. This is one of the things I found on the DVD, uh, on the DVD RAM that I just converted last night, and it's so good.
Perfect.
Welcome to Satellite Industry News Update. Making both national and local news in the eastern section of the United States this week was the mysterious Captain Midnight. For those of you who did not hear about the antics of this video hacker, Captain Midnight startled cable viewers when he interrupted the HBO presentation of The Falcon and the Snowman with a printed message protesting HBO's scrambling of its satellite-to-Earth TV signals. The message, which was printed in white letters on a color-barred test pattern background, read, "Good evening, HBO from Captain Midnight. $12.95 a month? No way. Showtime Movie Channel, beware." It appeared at 12:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time and remained on the air for about 5 minutes, thus seen in the eastern two-thirds of the nation, accounting for more than one-half of HBO's 14.6 million subscribers. Al Levy, manager of corporate public relations for HBO, said, "While HBO did experience a minor interference, we're taking steps to ensure integrity of satellite transmissions. This is a serious federal offense," he said, "that threatens every satellite user, including the federal government, TV and radio broadcast networks, as well as telephone and business data companies. Therefore, we fully intend to aggressively pursue both civil and criminal penalties once the individual or individuals involved are found." The FCC recently issued a warning to any person contemplating malicious interference to satellite uplink operations. The warning specifies that such deliberate jamming carries a statutory penalty of fines not to exceed $10,000 or up to a year in a jail for offenders.
So this guy, he ended up getting like a year unsupervised probation or something.
Well, I love stories like this because it points out the vulnerabilities of such systems, and okay, they get a little flustered. There was a similar thing that happened in, I believe it was Dallas, Texas, where some Sunday morning, all of the civil, alarm systems, the sirens went off simultaneously. And it turns out that that system was activated by a completely unencrypted, unauthenticated radio transmission on a certain frequency of, I don't know what the signaling, it might have been a sequence of
A PL
DMTF
tone or
tones.
something, yeah.
Yeah. And so, all of a sudden they said, oh, maybe we should fix this.
So
Before somebody, malicious actually, apparently it was, kind of a prank, but they didn't take it that way. So yeah, I love examples like this where it doesn't do any real harm. It just points out the vulnerabilities, and we keep discovering those, like the simplistic RF unlocking systems on some vehicles. So
yeah.
we really need radio savvy hackers to figure this stuff out, because as we well know, security by obscurity does not work anymore.
No, it doesn't work very well. No. So then I'm going through Bob Cooper's stuff, and I found a couple of bumper stickers. This one says, "Earth Station owners support Captain Midnight." Isn't that great? And this one says, "Captain Midnight Grassroots Coalition," and there's a phone number on there too. So I mean, people are just like, yeah, Captain Midnight, free. We don't want to pay for free TV. And this one says, "My TVRO gets the straight scoop from Coop Satellite Digest."
Yep.
And I also found a Clinton Gore 92 bumper sticker, which I just thought would be hilarious to put on my car now, just it being an election year. Just
this is true.
People. I also found a bag, a big Ziploc bag filled with
currency.
Yeah, it's Portuguese escudos, which went away when the euro came. These are absolutely worthless now, but I've got about 2,000 escudos.
Interesting.
Yeah. So yeah, I found all sorts of weird stuff. And then
you found a little bit of hardware too, didn't you?
I did. We'll talk about that in a minute. And then I found a whole bunch of almost a complete run of the 50 megahertz DX bulletin published by Harry School's KA3B of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania.
Oh,
and
cool.
This was a newsletter. I love when we go from literally the internet had almost nothing about this newsletter. Like it, pretty much didn't exist. And now we have a nearly complete set. and it'll be scanned soon and online. So
Great.
yeah, yeah, and we're missing volume one and a couple issues here and there that got lost. So, but they're all in the box and ready to go to Scanning Center. So, and okay, let's talk about how you participated in this thing. We in some of the boxes was hardware. Maybe I can pull up a picture for everyone's watching a video while you're telling your side of the story. But there was old radios, and um, it was just, Bob Cooper's had a collection of old radios and things, and shortwave radios, and I don't know, gadgets that I could not even, I don't even know what they were. And I didn't, I knew, I mean, Internet Archive, DLARC doesn't need this stuff. We can't, you can't scan a radio, you can't put it online, so I took pictures of the stuff, but didn't know what to do with it. And it was going to have to go to the electronics recycler until I sent you a picture of it. And why don't you tell the story?
I wish I could. I hadn't thought about this to pull up the um, gentleman's name that I contacted, but I since you were literally busy, had your hands full, literally. Um, but when you dropped me a text message and told me about this hardware, I started Googling, and I eventually came upon a radio repair store in um, Denver that looked promising. So I called the number. The gentleman replied, called me back, and I explained the situation. And he initially wasn't that interested. Um, he repairs old, classic hi-fi sets, and so I sent him a picture, and he replied back and said, "It's not that interesting to me." And then I, I told him the rest of the story, that this was from Bob Cooper's personal collection, and told him just a very skeleton story about the significance of Bob. And he says, I can think of someone, and I'll get in touch with them, and I'll call you back." And within 5 minutes, he had called me back and said, my buddy would love to have all this stuff. Put me in touch with your contact, and we can make this happen. So all that stuff was going to go into a recycling dumpster, and now it went to a good home. So tell me what happened on your end of the
Sure.
thing.
So if you're watching on video, you can see some of the stuff. There's just one nice picture that I took. There's a Heathkit receiver and a bunch of old AM radios and antenna tuners and things like that. Um, and so I get a call from the gentleman, and I'm just like, okay, look, I'm in this warehouse. You can't come into the warehouse because they have security, but drive up to the warehouse and I'll get the stuff to you. So he's like, he brought his truck and he pulls up to the warehouse, and I start wheeling out uh, boxes of this radio gear to him. He was so excited. It was like a kid on Christmas Day. He was just overwhelmed looking at all this stuff and loading it into his truck. And I was so glad that the stuff found a home, because I couldn't use the stuff. It was literally a case of one man's trash is another man's treasure.
Yeah.
And he took it all, and he's telling me, he's going to give some of it to his buddy. He's going to keep some of it for himself, and he's going to fix this up. And I was like, do whatever you want. It's yours. Enjoy it. And so he pretty much loaded up the back of his truck with these things. And he also took a bunch of books too, a bunch of books that we didn't need to scan because they've already been scanned by Internet Archive. So yeah, he was just thrilled, and he drove an hour and a half each way to come get the stuff.
Oh,
And yeah, I mean he might have been 2 miles away in Denver traffic. Who knows? So anyway, he was thrilled, and he went on his merry way, and that was it. So that was the story. But I appreciate you finding a home for this stuff, because I was too busy unboxing things and reboxing things and watching my fingers bleed to have to. I didn't have time to do this.
I agree wholeheartedly with your triage, the decisions that you were making, that the hardware was obviously not unique. It wasn't, none of it, it was all commercial. Um, it there had to be examples existing in museums, etc. But it would have been a shame if we hadn't at least tried. And that was the philosophy. And we'll put the gentleman's contact information in the show notes because he deserves. He answered the phone, he responded, he knew folks, and so that particular batch of Coops hardware was saved. And I like having a small role in that save. So cool.
Yeah.
And good on you for spotting it and at least reaching out. You could have taken the easy route. Just I'm sure that particular warehouse, which I guess will remain nameless, had many electronics recycling bins.
Yes, they did. So yeah, anyway, it was a good experience, and I'm doing another run to Fair Radio in a couple of weeks, so we'll talk about that in the future, I'm sure. So, yeah, so that was that.
So this was an exceptional save for Internet Archive and DLARC, but this isn't the usual experience that you have when somebody contacts you, right?
No, I mean, normally when somebody contacts me, they let me know what they have. Um, I assess whether DLARC needs that, and then they ship it to us. And we are grant funded, so sometimes we're able to pay for the shipping. But it's just like, oh, you have a box of books or newsletters or whatever it is, put it in a box, take it to FedEx, and then it goes to our scanning center. And oftentimes I never actually physically touch the thing from the time it's donated to it's online. It goes to the scanning center, it gets done. Um, so I don't need to see it and handle it. But sometimes, occasionally there is such a large amount of material that it needs to, or this was such a diverse amount of types of material that really needed to be triaged and sorted. And because the scanning center doesn't want old radios and doesn't want to scan books that it already has 3 copies of and that sort of thing. So yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So this was a new role for sure.
So you were, what is the, oh, so you are, in this case, you are an away team of one, which
Yes.
is
And
Internet Archive's name for the folks that go out for really big things.
right. Yeah.
So cool.
Yeah. Yeah. So
So
that's that.
speaking of things that you've saved,
Mhm.
for DLARC, or maybe this predated, I think this predated DLARC, but there is one particular book that I leaned on heavily this week for zero retries. I wrote about the 902 to 928 megahertz band, which is simultaneously a Part 15 band for unlicensed operation and Part 97 band for amateur radio operation. And there is a wonderful book by a guy named Ben Cobb, and I didn't record Ben's call sign, um, called Wireless Spectrum Finder. And it's at least a decade out of date, maybe more. Um, and it's got an entire section on 902 to 928. And I remember reading that. In fact, I have, no, it's not within arm's reach. My previous office had it within arm's reach. I could, but it's a fantastic book. And because it was already online in Internet Archive, I could easily retrieve it and look at it. Now it's under controlled digital lending, so you can't download a PDF of it, but it's there for reference, and that was very useful. And that's just one tiny example of the utility of DLARC and Internet Archive. So Godspeed on your mission. As far as I'm concerned, it's a holy mission to get this stuff online and make it available.
So how was this useful in your research and writing this week?
I a couple of I wanted to include a couple of examples of some of the weird things that that the 902, 928 megahertz band had been put to. And Ben Cobb had done an excellent job of summarizing all the weird overlapping permissions of the 902 to 928 megahertz band. For example, normally, so amateur radio being a licensed service, it trumps the activities of a licensed service can trump the activities of an unlicensed service. So if you're doing automatic meter reading on 902 to 928 using a Part 15 device, which is certified, the hardware is certified, then you don't have to get a user license. So amateur radio, if they're using, say, a repeater, an audio repeater in the 902 to 928 megahertz band, and that repeater experiences interference from the unlicensed operations, you can, basically issue them a cease and desist, not a legal cease and desist, but say, you're interfering with us, please turn off your automatic meter reading system. But the 902 to 928 megahertz band is such a unique case that the FCC specifically said, okay, licensed services, you can't do that. You cannot tell the unlicensed guys to be quiet. You're just going to have to deal with it, just like every other unlicensed service has to deal with all the other transmissions in the band. So it's truly a mismatch, and Ben did such a fantastic job of sussing all that out and getting it into print. It's an example of a really powerful understanding of your subject matter. And he wrote, it was just it's one of those examples of distilled wisdom. It's it's just the whole book is like that. Now it's dated, like talks about the upper, I don't know now, 30 channels of what was then the UHF TV band, and there were some interesting uses put to that, but now all that's been reassigned to auctioned off to cellular use. So anyway, just gems like that in Internet Archive and DLARC specifically, and all those wonderful newsletters that you just keep finding. So yeah, that was very cool.
Nice.
Let's see. Yeah, so this was a fun issue to write, as I mentioned in my editorial.
Irrational exuberance, right?
Yeah. I only realized that I had been writing for too long when my butt became numb sitting in my chair. I shifted around and all of a sudden the tingles started. I said, oh boy. And I glanced up, and sure enough, it had been 90 minutes since I had started.
That's the best flow state, right? When you're just so into your thing that you lose track of time, and all of a sudden the sun's down and your butt is tingling, and your legs have fallen asleep, and you've just so into your work that nothing else exists. I love it.
It's a Zen thing for me. I mean, I really truly enjoy the writing, especially when I've latched onto a subject that I really want to explain. And as I talk in Zero Retries about these 4 points of irrational exuberance, that I just, and it wasn't that any one thing was cool. It was the 4 things happening in the same week, and it just, as I said, it just keeps me going for, riding through some low points. One of my worst irritations in amateur radio is someone declaring, by fiat, well, X activity, well, that's not real amateur radio. It's like, you blankety blank blank. So anyway, yeah, this was one of those really good weeks, and I got some really great comments back on it. And some, and the best comments are fodder for future issues, and one guy in the comments page of Zero Retries for this issue started talking about his idea of a future ultimate VHF UHF amateur radio, based on software defined radio. And so we exchanged a few ideas, and then so that's going to be a future topic of Zero Retries, is imagining what that actually would look like. And I've learned, to my surprise and delight, that if you can articulate some of these things, well thought out, sometimes somebody was just looking for an interesting idea and makes it happen. And that's happened to me twice now, that people have taken something they read in zero retries and gone off and done something about it. So that was cool. And then I got a very nice email from a guy who is a teacher of um, autistic and ADD kids, and he said he subscribed to zero retries because he is constantly looking for ideas to challenge these kids, and the stuff that gets thrown out and or thrown up into zero retries, bad choice of words, um, uh, is an inspiration to him for future ideas for challenging his students. So wow, that felt good. Shared that with my wife and daughter, and they were suitably impressed. So
Cool.
yep.
Very nice.
And so yeah, irrational exuberance was this week's theme.
Love it. I love it. And the quote, what's the full quote?
Oh, so this quote was from a person who was involved in a group that I was involved with, and can't say the name. Nothing great has ever been accomplished without irrational exuberance. And Tom Eslin was the guy who essentially created the VoIP bypass industry, in the early days of the internet. And then I riffed on his quote. I said, irrational exuberance is pretty much the business model of Zero Retries newsletter. So yeah, irrational exuberance is a really good way to say it. And I've, it's a useful mental model for how I feel about amateur radio in general, and the potential of it. Oh, and another interesting thing was that I talked about an article that was actually published in IEEE Spectrum in January about how the low Earth orbit satellite industry needs more qualified people, and how they are addressing this shortage with various targeted programs to bring people into the satellite industry and teach them, the basics. And my a person who I call a pseudo staffer of Zero Retries, because I use their input so often, not always intentionally by them, Dan Romanchik KB6NU, saw this article and said, well, why aren't they paying attention to amateur radio? We've been doing low Earth orbit, satellite communications for decades now. In fact, almost all of our satellites are low Earth orbit satellites. And he kind of took the author or the person that was the target of the article, took him to task for not including amateur radio. And by all indications from the article, there was no mention of amateur radio at all. But it turns out the author, or the subject of the article, the guy who was teaching the course, was a Zero Retry subscriber. And he reached out back to me and Dan and said, oops, sorry about that. Yes, we absolutely do use amateur radio in the course. And, and we teach amateur radio very intensively. It's unfortunate that the article didn't reflect that we do this. So thank you for calling into our attention that there was this unintentional oversight of, not mentioning amateur radio, but amateur radio is very important to us in this curriculum. And so that was cool. That was a win for Zero Retries. So he was
Beautiful.
very nice about Zero Retries. So, Zero Retries is getting some traction out there.
Beautiful. Love it.
So
Should we
that was
call it?
cool. Yeah. Oh, and one last one. Dan also wrote a good article about his experiences at the Hope Conference,
Mm-hmm.
and
Hackers
he said,
on Planet Earth.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And he had mentioned that he taught a class there, and 25 prospective hams took the test at Hope, and they, by definition, they were all hackers. They were interested in amateur radio because Dan presented amateur radio in a useful context to them about what they can actually be doing on amateur radio that's relevant to their interests of hacking. And so they happily took the test. And what I've been observing is that this turned into a bit of a meme, a mini meme out there on the internet. And it's kind of transformed from Dan asking the question, are hackers the future of ham radio? The meme that I've been observing is hackers are the future of ham radio. So it turned it from a question to a statement. So, and that's all to the good, that furthers the zero retries mission of portraying amateur radio in a way that's relevant to current society and especially the techies.
Haven't
So,
hackers always been the future of amateur radio? With the definition of hacker changing over time, certainly, but
you do remember the definition, the original definition of the hackers. The very first who were labeled hackers was the MIT Railroad Club.
sure, yeah, absolutely.
Way back.
Mhm.
So yeah, we've always
Tech
been
Model Railroad Club.
yeah, and we've always been on the bleeding edge of doing things. It's just for some reason the ham radio has fallen out of the mainstream knowledge, and in fairness, because we were always, the pops, if you go up to ask the average person, ham radio, they think of grandpa sitting in the basement in front of a great big tube set.
Right, hunched over the straight key. Yeah.
Yes,
right.
Exactly. That's the popular, and we haven't done, we collectively, amateur radio has not done a good enough job of explaining that ain't what we do anymore. Not all of what we do. There's still that if that's your thing, it's a big hobby, go for it. But there's a lot more to it, as Dan demonstrated by going to the Hope Conference and graduating at least some more new amateur radio operators with their personal goal of hacking within amateur radio, which is Godspeed for that. So, absolutely. And that with that, I'm done. It's just so, this stuff is so much fun. And I made the point that there's so much going on out there that I don't think 2 full human lifetimes would be enough to tackle all the things that I'm really interested in. Like amateur TV is a thing. And there's people that do that, that's their thing in amateur radio. It's not something I've ever done. I'd like to try it one of these days, but there's a lot space,
sure.
Lots of things. Big hobby.
Amateur TV does not have to mean hacking a telecommunications satellite.
That's true. Very, very true. In fact, I saw one guy who said, let's send slow scan TV over FM repeaters. And that apparently is being done. So you just share your shack photos, over a local VHF, UHF repeater, which is probably quiet these days. So might as well use it for something.
Yeah. Well, send low res black and white pictures. Why not?
Well, boy, this is our longest one to date. So I think we probably ought to wrap it up.
I think so too. This has been episode number 3 of Store and Forward, a podcast about the past and future of amateur radio. I am K Savitz, K6KJN, and I am curator of the Digital Library of Amateur Radio and Communications. You can and should check that out at archive.org/details/DLARC. We have more amateur radio material than you could shake a tube at. I don't know. I'll work on that.
More than one lifetime's worth.
And you are?
I am Steve Stroh, NHGNJ. I am the editor of the Zero Retries newsletter, which talks about the techier side of amateur radio, the stuff you don't read about in the mainstream amateur radio media. And you can find Zero Retries at www.zeroretries, all one word, ZERORETRAES.org. And Zero Retries is free to subscribe to. And I welcome more subscribers and readers and, and commenters and contributors. Please, you'll get the idea as soon as you read just one issue. It kind of overflows in every issue. So thanks, Kay.
Thank you.
Have a good day. You enjoy the sun while we've got it.
While we've got it, while we can.
Yep.
All right. And once again, we're now at storeandforwardradio.org. Mark your bookmarks. Mark your calendar. I don't know. Bye.
Take care. 7-3.